December 12th, 1972. A private castle. The most powerful people in the world. Behind closed doors. No press was allowed inside. No official record was filed. But the photographs survived. And when I looked at them closely, I stopped breathing. Because these weren't costumes. Every single guest, every person in that room had been classified. Before they arrived, before they even dressed. Prey, caged, double-faced, and something far worse, a role with no mask at all. I found something inside these photographs that no one talks about. A pattern so precise, it couldn't be accidental. And then I realized, the castle isn't the disturbing part. You've been in that room. You walk into it every day. The roles are still there. The masks are still there. The people who built the room are still there. You just can't see the walls anymore. There is one moment in this story, one detail, that changes everything before it. I tried to look away from it. I couldn't. Neither will you. They left the photographs on purpose. They knew we'd find them. The question is, why weren't they afraid of that? The chateau was a prototype. What surrounds you now is the finished product. December 12th, 1972. A private castle outside Paris. No press allowed. No public record filed. No official guest list ever released. And yet, the photographs exist. I want you to look at those photographs carefully. Not because of what they show, because of what someone clearly wanted you to see. This wasn't a secret event. It was an event designed to look like one. There's a difference, and that difference matters. The host was Marie-Hélène de Rothschild, one of the most powerful women in European high society. The location, Château de Ferrières, a private estate so vast it had its own hunting grounds, its own staff quarters, its own internal world. The date was chosen. The hour was chosen. Nothing about this night was accidental. The invitations arrived weeks before the event, but no one could read them. Not at first. They were printed entirely in mirror script. To read your own invitation, you had to hold it up to a mirror. Think about that for a moment. These were some of the most educated, most powerful people in the world. Politicians, bankers, artists, industrialists, and their first instruction was, find a mirror. Why? Why would someone design an invitation that requires a specific act to decode? Who sends a message that can only be read in reverse? At the time, most guests treated it as an eccentric artistic gesture. Surrealism, after all, was about disrupting normal perception, about making the familiar strange. But here's what I kept coming back to. Surrealism as an art movement died decades before 1972. So why use its language now? Unless the language itself was the point. That mirror. That small, strange act of decoding your own invitation. It seemed like a theatrical detail. Later, much later, I realized it was the first instruction in a much longer sequence, and everyone who attended had already agreed to follow it. The second detail that stopped me, the start time. Guests were asked to arrive after midnight, not in the evening, not at 10. After midnight, there's a psychological shift that happens at that hour. The ordinary world is asleep. Your defenses are lower. Your sense of normal, quietly suspended. Why structure a social gathering around the hour when people are most disoriented? And then there was the dress code. Surrealist black tie. That phrase sounds like creative freedom. Wear whatever surreal costume you like. But look at the photographs. The costumes aren't random. They aren't individual. They fall into categories. Prey, controllers, observers, objects, the same archetypes, over and over, as if the options had been quietly pre-selected. One category, I noticed, was completely absent. I won't tell you which one yet, but when I do, it will change how you see everything before it. The guests crossed the threshold just after midnight. The mirrors were already inside. The masks were already waiting. And the room had been designed long before any of them arrived. This wasn't surrealism as rebellion. It wasn't art for art's sake. Every detail, the mirror text, the hour, the dress code, the architecture of the space, was a system. A closed, carefully constructed system. And everyone inside it believed they had chosen to be there. The photographs from that night show faces, some laughing, some posed, some unreadable. But look at the eyes. Behind every mask, something was already shifting. The masks hadn't been worn long, and they were already working. Next, we decode what those masks actually said. Because they weren't costumes, they were classifications. When I first saw the photographs from that night, I thought I understood them. Costumes, eccentricity, wealth performing itself. I was wrong. It took me 3 separate viewings before I noticed it. The masks weren't random. They weren't even individual. Every single guest, every person who walked through those doors fit into one of 4 categories. And nobody talked about it. Let me show you what I mean. The most photographed guest that night wore a stag's head. Full antlers, real scale, mounted above her own face like a trophy. The antlers were wrapped in diamonds, hundreds of them. Now, a stag is a hunted animal. That's not a modern interpretation. That's ancient symbolism. Across European tradition, the stag represents one thing, something powerful, beautiful, and destined to be pursued. She wore it as a centerpiece, as if being prey was an honor. Ask yourself, who convinced her of that? Here's the detail that stayed with me. The diamonds weren't decoration, they were weight. The headdress was estimated at several kilograms. She couldn't turn her head quickly. She couldn't look away without effort. She was physically oriented, forward, presented. That wasn't a costume choice. That was engineering. Another guest wore a birdcage over her head. Not a miniature, not symbolic. A full, structured cage, fitted precisely around her skull. Inside it, a small bird ornament, frozen mid-flight. The cage had no door. The face behind the bars was fully visible. And that's what made it disturbing. She wasn't hidden. She was displayed. The cage wasn't keeping something out. It was keeping something in, and making sure everyone could watch. When was the last time you felt watched? And performed anyway? Several guests wore masks with 2 faces. One forward, one backward, one expression of calm, and one you could only see if someone walked behind them. This one I spent the longest time studying, because it's the most honest mask in the room. 2 faces, simultaneously. Not hiding one, carrying both. At the time, I thought this was the strangest costume of the night. Later, I realized it was the most familiar. I'll come back to that. Because you already know someone who wears it. You might be wearing it right now. Not all the masks were passive. Some guests arrived as wolves, as hawks, as figures draped in black with faces that revealed nothing. No emotion, no expression, no readable humanity. These weren't costumes of restriction. They were costumes of observation. They watched. They moved freely. Their masks didn't limit them. The masks protected them. And here is where I stopped. Because I realized something. In every photograph, wherever a predator figure stood, the people around them adjusted. Slightly, subtly, but they adjusted. The body language shifted. Posture changed. Nobody spoke about it, but everyone felt it. 4 categories: prey, caged, double-faced, predator. Every guest at the ball fit inside one of them. And here is the question I couldn't shake. Did they choose their category? Or did they arrive already knowing which one they were? I told you in part 1. One category was missing. I've shown you 4. But there is a 5th role. It wasn't on the guest list. It didn't need a mask. And it was the most powerful position in the room. I'll show you in part 3. Here is what the photographs actually document. Not a party, a taxonomy, a living, breathing classification system where the most powerful people in the world willingly labeled themselves, walked into a controlled space, and performed their assigned function, and called it entertainment. Look at that image one more time. Not as a photograph from 1972. Look at it as a diagram, because once you see the structure, you can't stop seeing it. The masks told you what you were. The room told you what to do. But the room was the real masterpiece. Every light, every table, every closed door. It wasn't decorated, it was calibrated. Next, we go inside. And I'll show you exactly how a space can make people forget who they were before they walked in. There is a concept in environmental psychology. It's called behavioral architecture. The idea is simple. A space doesn't just contain people. It shapes them. The temperature, the light, the sound, the distance between doors, where the exits are, and whether you can find them easily. All of it communicates something. All of it produces a response. The designers of Château de Ferrières that night understood this deeply. The lighting was the first thing, not dark, but never bright, specifically calibrated to the threshold where faces become unreadable, where you can see someone, but not quite see them, where your brain works slightly harder to process what's in front of you. That cognitive load does something. It makes you more focused on your immediate environment, less aware of the larger structure around you, less likely to step back and ask, who built this room and why? Guests who attended described the atmosphere in similar terms. Theatrical, dreamlike, uncomfortable in a way I couldn't name. That last phrase, uncomfortable in a way I couldn't name. That's not an accident. That's a design outcome. When discomfort has no clear source, you don't leave, you adapt. The tables weren't set for dinner. They were set like stages. Each one told a story before anyone sat down. Mannequin hands emerging from the tablecloth, doll heads used as centerpieces, candles melted into shapes that looked almost human, and the food. The food was where it became something else entirely. Dishes were presented in forms that made you pause before eating, shapes that resembled bodies, faces, hands, not graphic, not violent, just wrong enough to notice, just uncomfortable enough to create a moment of hesitation. And in that moment of hesitation, something shifted. What does it mean when the act of eating becomes a question? One guest later described sitting down at the table and feeling, for just a moment, like they were part of the display. Not a guest, an exhibit. That feeling has a name in psychology. I'll come back to it, because you've felt it too. In a room that had nothing to do with 1972. There were sections of the chateau that were closed, doors that existed but didn't open. Corridors visible from certain angles, but unreachable. This is a specific technique. When you can see a space but cannot access it, your brain registers it as a boundary. And boundaries don't just limit movement, they define hierarchy. The people who could move through every door, and the people who couldn't. Did the guests notice which category they were in? Did they ask? Here is something I found that doesn't appear in most descriptions of that night. The photography wasn't open. There was a designated photographer. Specific moments were captured. Others, deliberately, weren't. Certain guests appeared in dozens of photographs. Others, almost none. The visual record of that night was edited in real time, which means what we see today isn't documentation. It's a selection. Someone decided what this night would look like to anyone who wasn't there. And here is where I want you to pause, because this detail, this one specific detail, connects 1972 to something you experience every single day. The ball wasn't a party that became a controlled environment. It was a controlled environment that was called a party. The masks, the lighting, the closed doors, the curated photography. It wasn't atmosphere. It was a system with inputs and outputs. Input: powerful individuals with established identities. Output: those same individuals performing assigned roles, inside a space they didn't design, following rules they never saw written down, and leaving, believing they had simply had an extraordinary evening. The room didn't change. The people changed. And the room stayed exactly as it was, ready for the next group. Who builds a room like that? And what else have they built? I told you there was a fifth role, a category with no mask, no costume, no label. The people who moved through every door, who appeared in none of the photographs, who designed the room, and then stepped back to watch it work. They weren't guests. They were never guests. Next, I'll show you where those same people are standing right now, and I'll show you the room they built for you. I want to leave the chateau for a moment. Stay with me, because everything I'm about to show you, you already know. You just never had a name for it. 1972 is over. The ball ended. The guests went home. The masks were removed. Or, that's what we're supposed to believe. Watch that moment. The second he crosses the threshold, something changes. His shoulders adjust. His jaw sets differently. His eyes go somewhere else. He didn't decide to do that. It happened automatically, because the room told him who to be. Carl Jung called it the persona, not the person, the persona, the mask we construct for the social world, the version of ourselves calibrated for a specific environment. Jung wasn't describing something rare. He was describing something universal. Every single person alive is wearing one. The question he never fully answered: is there anything underneath? Think about your own day. The version of you that exists at work. Is that you? The version that appears in photographs? Is that you? The version that speaks to parents? That performs for strangers? That exists online? Which one is actually you? And here is the detail that stops most people cold. You didn't build those versions consciously. They were built for you, by the rooms you entered, by the people who were already inside them, by the rules you absorbed before you were old enough to question them. Remember the mirror invitation from part 1? The instruction that made no sense at first. Hold this up to a mirror to read it. I told you it would come back. Here it is. The mask you wear every day. You can only see it in the mirror. Not the glass kind. The kind that shows you how others see you. A photograph. A reaction. A moment when someone responds to the version of you that you didn't know you were performing. When was the last time something reflected you back, and you didn't recognize what you saw? Now let me show you the 4 masks from part 2. In the world you live in right now. The prey, the person at work who is talented, visible, and constantly pursued. promoted when useful, discarded when not, wearing their value like a crown of diamonds, not realizing the weight of it is what keeps them from turning away. The caged, the person whose life looks full from the outside. Good job, correct opinions, appropriate relationships, displayed, watched, performing inside a structure with no visible door. The double-faced? And here is the one I told you to remember. The person who has mastered being different things to different rooms. Not lying, adapting. So precisely, so constantly, that the original face underneath has become the face they see least often. Do you know someone like this? Are you certain it isn't you? The predator. The person who moves freely between every room, who adjusts to nobody, whose mask, if they wear one at all, is the mask of normality, the most dangerous costume in the building, because it's invisible. And now, the fifth role, the one with no mask, the one I've been withholding since part 2. At the ball, these were the people who didn't appear in photographs, who moved through closed doors, who designed the environment, and then observed how others behaved inside it. In the modern world, they are the people who write the performance reviews, who design the platforms you use for hours every day, who decide which content you see first, who build the rooms and never have to live in them. The room is always built by someone, and that someone is never standing in it when you arrive. Here is the thing that took me the longest to accept. The system doesn't need force. It doesn't need walls or guards or visible authority. It just needs a room, a set of expectations, a mirror that shows you a version of yourself you want others to see, and the quiet, constant pressure of people around you doing exactly the same thing. That pressure doesn't feel like control. It feels like normal. Who decided what normal looks like in the room you spend most of your time in? There is one final question, the one I kept avoiding, because it's the most uncomfortable one. Not, are you wearing a mask? That answer is obvious now. The real question is, how long have you been wearing it? And the answer to that question will tell you something you may not be ready to hear. Next, what happens when the mask doesn't come off? Not because someone stops you, but because you've forgotten how. Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Go back to part 2. Find the moment where I described the double-faced mask. 2 expressions, one forward, one hidden behind. Pause on that image and ask yourself one question. Which face do the people closest to you actually see? Write your answer in the comments. Not a theory, not a guess about someone else. Your answer. I'll wait. The ball ended sometime before sunrise. The cars came back. The masks were removed. The guests returned to their lives. And here is what the official record shows. Nothing unusual happened. A private party. An eccentric theme. Wealthy people entertaining themselves. That's the documented version. But I kept thinking about one thing. The masks were designed to be worn for hours. The straps, the weight distribution, the ventilation. These weren't grabbed from a costume shop. They were engineered for endurance. Why engineer a mask for endurance? If you only plan to wear it one night? There is a psychological phenomenon called role engulfment. It was first documented in the 1960s by sociologist David Schmid. The principle is simple. When a person inhabits a role long enough, the role stops being something they do. It becomes something they are. The mask doesn't feel like a mask anymore. It feels like a face. Think about the first day of a job you've held for years. You were uncertain, watching others, learning not just the tasks, but the tone, the language, the acceptable emotions, how to disagree without seeming difficult, how to succeed without threatening anyone above you, how to be seen, but not too clearly. You learned the mask, and then you wore it long enough that you stopped noticing it was there. When did the role become the answer to the question, who are you? Here is what the research actually shows. After 18 months in a sustained social role, a person's spontaneous behavior begins to align with that role. Not their performed behavior, their spontaneous behavior. The thing you do when no one is watching, when you're alone, when there's no audience. After long enough, the audience doesn't need to be there. You perform for the version of yourself that has forgotten what the original looked like. In part 1, I showed you an invitation printed in mirror script, a message that could only be read in reverse. I told you it would matter later. Here is why it matters now. The system doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with visible instructions. It arrives reversed, subtle enough that you have to work to decode it. And by the time you understand what it's asking, you've already agreed to it. The act of decoding was the agreement. What have you agreed to? Without realizing you were agreeing. The prey who wore diamonds, the caged one, displayed behind bars, the double face, carrying two selves, the predator, moving freely, and the fifth, the designer, the one who built the room and never entered it. 5 roles, 50 years later, different building, same structure. I spent a long time trying to find something sinister in that chateau, a conspiracy, a ritual, a hidden meaning beneath the surface. And then I realized the surface was the meaning. They didn't hide what they were doing. They displayed it, openly, photographed, preserved. Because the most reliable way to hide a system is to make it look like an event. Call it a party, call it culture, call it normal. And the people inside it will defend it themselves. You see it now, don't you? The office building with its unspoken rules. The social media feed curated like a chateau table. The relationships where certain rooms are always closed. The version of yourself you present to the world. And the version that exists in the silence between one performance and the next. The most disturbing thing about the 1972 ball isn't that it happened. It's that it never needed to happen again. One demonstration was enough, because the people in that room went home and built smaller versions of it. In companies, in institutions, in families, in the platforms that shape what you see before you've had your first coffee in the morning. The chateau was a prototype. What surrounds you now is the finished product. Pause here. Go back to the comment you were going to write earlier. The one about which face the people closest to you actually see. Now add one more thing. When did you last show them the other one? They didn't hide who they were. They showed it, clearly, openly, in photographs that still exist. The difference between them and you isn't the mask. It's that they knew they were wearing one.